Hi, so my name is Eric Robinson. I am the distance learning librarian for scholarly communications issues. So I back Ryan up in a lot of our online education, but my role is primarily, in addition to all our online reference that we provide them, my development focus is primarily on copyright issues, scholarly communication issues, open access questions, things like that. So I am fairly knowledgeable about this, but I'll preface with the pretty standard librarian claim at this point in a forum like this that I am not a lawyer, so this cannot be construed as legal advice. I don't think I'm legally required to say that, but it doesn't hurt. This is not legal advice, it's legal information. So
it's always good to know.
Let's go ahead and get started. Right. And again, I'll just emphasize this is fairly informal, especially with such a small group so far. So feel free to interrupt me at any point if you just want a little more detail or you have a specific question or something. We do have some sort of scenarios peppered in along the way, so we can kind of go through some real-world examples of what some of these analyses might look like. But let's go ahead and get started. So simply to start, just ask what is copyright. For most people, right off the bat, they think of the little trademark or copyright symbol. It is intellectual property. It's protection of intellectual property. Typically, people are thinking of books and publications and things like that. And they focus very heavily when people think about copyright. I'm not defining it yet, but when people think about copyright, they're typically thinking about things like restrictions on its use, protection and attribution, control of use, and protecting that copyrighted material for the creator or the author. And those are not accurate. I think a lot of times we focus pretty heavily on the restrictions and less on the purpose of copyright and its allowances, which is what we're going to be talking about a lot today. So while permission, control, protection, all of those things are important, the real purpose of copyright is actually to promote creativity. So by providing exclusive rights to a creator, we're allowing them essentially to profit from their intellectual work. So that's really what copyright is all about. That's at the center of it. The idea of it, as it's enshrined even in the Constitution, is to promote that progress. So it's actually written into the Constitution, Article 1, Section 8, which is this little bit right here, which, as beautiful as Thomas Jefferson's handwriting is, I cannot read that personally. So that says that Congress has the right, the enumerated power to promote the progress of science and the useful arts by securing for limited times to authors and inventors the exclusive right to their respective writings and discoveries. So the idea being that if you come up with something creatively, we'll reward that progress, those ideas and that advancement of science and the useful arts by letting you profit from that for a limited period. That's at the center of copyright. That's really where, for the U.S. anyway, it originates. It does go all the way back to the 1700s and Queen Anne in England, if you want to trace that route. But for our purposes, that's the constitutional law, and the rights that it actually secures for the creator are pretty expansive. It's not just selling the work. It's reproducing the work in any way, distributing it, which is what we typically think of as publication. For music or video creations, performance and display are a big thing. Transmission, especially in this day, electronic transmission is a big deal. All of these are secured as an exclusive right under U.S. law for the creator of that work, unless they've through contract transferred those rights. Another one that's a little unique is the right to prepare derivative works. So sometimes this gets confused with transformational use, but I want to kind of tease those apart a little bit. So derivative works would be like if I were to decide I wanted to write a novel about Hermione Granger and Harry Potter going off on another adventure. That's sort of deriving from the Harry Potter novels. So I don't have the right to do that directly. There's some license for creativity and transformation in uses that we'll get to very briefly, but I don't want to spend time on that because it's less relevant to the educational environment. But I do want to give you a flavor of what we mean by preparation of derivative works. So those are the primary rights that are secured under the law for the creator. But what exactly is it that's protected? In the U.S. Code, what it actually says is it refers to original works of authorship. So that means there has to be some sort of unique creativity in something. I can't just take something, take a work that's out there and put it in a new form. I have to add some creativity to it, and it has to be fixed in some tangible form. So that could be scribbled on a napkin. That could be typed into my computer, but not necessarily published. As long as it's been fixed in some form, recorded or videotaped, that once it's fixed in that form, it is protected. The idea, a lot of people are under the impression that for it to be protected, it has to have been published or released to the public in some way, or even registered with the U.S. Copyright Office or some other similar authority. That's actually not necessary for copyright protection. So even if you have a single manuscript that you've written, whether it's registered or distributed or not, you have your sort of great American novel only in digital form on your computer, you haven't even backed it up somewhere, that's still protected under copyright. Where the registration comes in is that once something is registered with the U.S. Copyright Office, then it's much easier to sort of prove the originality of the authorship and assert your creative rights to that work because it's been recorded with a governmental institution. And that's the reason that the U.S. Copyright Office requires a deposit of registered copyrighted works so that they have that as a record of what it is that you were registering. Under the law, all of those protections of distribution and performance and everything else are subject to a pretty expansive list of limitations, particularly when it comes to education and scholarship, which is what we're going to talk about a lot. There are also exceptions for libraries for preserving items. So a single copy of a book that's out of print and decaying, if we want to make some sort of photo reproduction of that book in order to preserve the content of it, we can. In a situation where it's out of print and it's no longer being produced and it's really kind of this novel or this Shakespearean play is going to go extinct if we don't transfer it to a new medium or something like that. Those preservation exceptions are pretty expansive. Anytime someone's parodying something or creating satire that draws on an original work, that's certainly allowed in a democracy that's critical of that allows for criticism. I just realized I have preservation in there twice. And the other major exception is transformational use. So again, don't want to dwell on that too heavily, but I do have a really good example of transformational use that I love. You may or may not recognize this picture of Obama with George Clooney. It's less the George Clooney part than the Obama part that you would recognize. That was originally a photograph by Manny Garcia, and he actually got into a lawsuit with Shepard Fairey, the artist of the famous Obama Hope poster, on whether that was transformed and creative enough in its new form to be a violation of Manny Garcia's original copyrighted photograph or not. Curiously, that's gone on to other iterations. A cartoon depicting the two of them fighting over that poster, which is arguably yet another transformational use. And then even my slide incorporating that cartoon could potentially be yet another transformational use because I'm putting it in perspective of what transformation is. Just kind of to give you a brief idea of that, I think that's a great example of how works can be reused in different ways, and that does actually have relevance for scholarship and education, because you may be using an article to illustrate a very specific point, or pulling an image or a table to demonstrate proper or construction or scholarship in different ways that go beyond into the realm of criticism, scholarship, and education, that go beyond the protections of the original author in that way. When it comes to what we call fair use, those are the protected exceptions for scholars and others. There are 4 factors that are weighed significantly in every court case that's come down the line. The court is typically weighing a number of elements in terms of, is this an original enough use given the level of violation, to use a word, the level of infringement. Does the level of infringement and reuse of the work warrant the effect of the use, the new purpose, and how it's being used? So that really boils down to the nature of the original work in many ways. Works of fiction or creative works or artistic works are much more protected than our factual materials. You cannot copyright facts. You can copyright expressions of facts, but then when you're reworking how you're using that original material, even given that it's factual, you can reassert those facts without violating the original author's work. So the nature of the copyrighted work is one. The purpose and character of your reuse of that work is another. Are you just running off mimeographed copies of War and Peace and selling them, or are you repurposing that in some way? Are you using it primarily for profit or primarily for educational or use, like criticism or parody or something like that? How much of the work that you use? This is typically what people think of when they think of fair use. There's some misinformation out there about as long as it's less than this amount, it's fine. That's not necessarily true. The courts have found that even a single page of a book, if it's somehow at the heart of the work itself and has an effect on the market value for that original work, that in itself can be an infringement regarding fair use protections. Which brings us to the last, and probably one of the ones that can be seen as getting more weight than the others, but they really are brought together for a full perspective. No single one of these things weighs under the law more than any other. But anytime that you're infringing on the market for that original work, that's a pretty big red flag. So we want to watch out for that. Those 4 factors will be revisited again and again. So we're going to come into a scenario real quick if Ryan wants to step back in.
Hey everybody, remember me, I'm Ryan. I just wanted to come in and stop in and read this quick scenario here, which is a professor, let's say, wants to save students some money on textbooks so the students won't have to buy the actual textbook. The professor then photocopies the most important chapters and then places them on reserve in the library.
So if we want to kind of think about, sorry, go ahead, Ryan.
Oh, no, please, go ahead.
So if we want to think about this in terms of the 4 factors, if anybody wants to chime in here, they're certainly welcome to. The first one is the nature of the use, right? Or the nature of the original work. If it's a textbook, it's probably very factual based.
Certainly.
Let's assume it's a physical therapy textbook and it's about treatment and physiology and things like that. So very factual based, the original work. Being used for educational purposes, not necessarily selling that chapter off to the highest bidder.
How many chapters might be appropriate? Yeah.
One curious fact, one sort of curious thing to think about when you're thinking about the purpose of the reuse being educational is that we work for a for-profit institution. So yes, it's educational, but in what sense is that use being used to create profit? We're not selling the work directly,
Right.
but we are using those works in a for-profit environment. So that really complicates things a bit. The third factor is, let's go back to that real quick, the amount and substantiality of the use. So if he's doing a large number of chapters or significant chapters or the most important chapters, that could likely be a very substantial amount. Let's say it's a 500-page textbook. He puts 4 50-page chapters, scans those in, or photocopies those. That's a good third of the book or more.
Right.
So we're getting pretty substantial there. And if it's something that is, as we said, the most important chapters, that really gets at the heart of the work, like I mentioned before. So it might not even matter how much they're being used if it's really a portion that's at the heart of the work.
Right.
And of course, he's doing this to save money. So these students that are taking part in these textbooks are not going to be purchasing a textbook. That's kind of the whole point as far as this professor is concerned. So there's definitely an effect on the market. So we can see how potentially, even though this is for educational purposes, there are a lot of things in here that raise flags. So as we get a little more specific, we might ask, well, how many chapters is he doing? He's doing 1 chapter. That may or may not be okay, but it's probably better than 9 of the 10 chapters in the book. So that's pretty significant. What if he's scanning it and putting it on the web? He's not making actual physical photocopies.
Yes.
Still a problem, depending on the amount. He could easily be potentially even worse, affecting the market if there's a PDF of the entire book or substantial chapters from the book on the web. That really does seem to potentially even more get at infringement if that's being distributed on the web. How about if you put it in the university's course shell? It's behind a sign-in, a login, fairly protected. Maybe he even adds additional messages to the sort of labels on the item saying, this item is protected by copyright and should not be shared beyond this course or something like that. Those are the kinds of things that swing that pendulum back over toward fair use, limiting the effect on the potential market, ensuring that it's really only being used for those educational purposes. So that's kind of one example, pretty crystal clear example, if not in terms of the result, but a very vivid example of how you might apply analysis of those 4 factors to a realistic scenario. One thing that came about as online teaching caught on, and you probably heard of it to some extent, is the TEACH Act, which was essentially an update, kind of a 21st century update to copyright law, particularly regarding transmission of copyrighted works. So as the online classroom became more and more of a thing, there was argument about the idea of what I would use in my classroom, say showing a video or sharing an article within my class, now goes into online. Now I'm sharing it online, but that transmission, while it's still very much educational, potentially bridges into wide-ranging distribution across the web. So that was kind of a problem for copyright law. So the TEACH Act revised that to reflect that to some extent. It did revise laws for performance and display in digital education, but only under very specific circumstances. So you are allowed to do that with some things, but again, it really goes back to those 4 factors. How much is it? How much of the original work is it? What's the purpose? What's the effect on the market? All of those things still play really the exact same role that they played before. It's just broadened out to say we need to consider this other environment. Some of those circumstances that are described, it really has to be a part of the class experience. So it's not just being I'm not just streaming the greatest hits of Orson Welles. It's part of my class instruction and relevant and integral to that. There has to be some sort of control by the instructor, just a sort of free-for-all sharing, and somewhat analogous to what you might do in a real classroom setting. So while you might show clips of a clinical examination video in class, you probably would not read an entire textbook in class. So while you could post maybe a 3-minute physical examination instructional video, you couldn't post the entire textbook, so to speak. So really limiting the access, limited duration, and taking reasonable measures and that wide-ranging web distribution are the things that really addresses. So while it does do a lot to allow for share and reuse of items in an online teaching setting, it is not a free-for-all. So it doesn't mean, just because the Teach Act is out there doesn't mean that you can go on to post anything that you want within your course shell. You really still have to weigh those factors. Which brings us to a digital scenario.
You want me to take this one as well?
Go for it.
Yeah, the second scenario we have here, a physical therapy instructor has a DVD of a physical exam procedure. This video is only available as a DVD, so the instructor rips the DVD to an MP4 file and posts the video to YouTube where the students can view it. A couple of things to consider, of course, being that, what if it's only a small portion of the video? I think that would probably come up in just a minute. Other things you probably want to consider is, what if instead of posting to YouTube that they share like a portion via the course shell? The things may be how many minutes of the video are exactly allowed to share. I'll let Eric speak some more about that now.
Sure. So he got here, what if it's only a small excerpt of the video? I think that is more of a fair use situation than if he were to rip the entire DVD. Maybe he wants to specifically get at a neuro examination or something, where it might be a 90-minute instructional video. That neuro examination is really only 4 minutes and critical to the lesson that he's trying to play. Posting it to YouTube, probably weighing pretty heavily against, because that's really then essentially creating a free copy for anyone. The fact that it's originally, in the original description, was the whole DVD, obviously not cool. A little one that didn't get mentioned by Ryan is the fact that it's only available as a DVD. If the instructor really needs this in a more flexible digital form, that's potentially an argument that he's really not affecting the market. If that publisher had some sort of streaming service that was available to the instructor, then that could be a problem. But given that it was only a DVD, that weighs more toward not affecting the market, because he can't use it as a DVD. He can only use it in that new streamable form. We mentioned a small portion, and again, what if they put it behind the course shell where the students had to log in to view it instead of posting to YouTube? It's really one of the big things in an online environment, and under the Teach Act, this comes down to library reserve situations as well, is, are you taking reasonable measures to protect that copyrighted material from being sort of released to the world on the internet? So by putting it behind the course shell where the students can only access it there, and again, maybe saying, while you're able to download this MP4, this is not to be distributed, or there's various language that you can utilize for notifying, putting students on notice about that sort of thing. And again, this is a sort of perennial question, and when it comes to fair use, is how much is too much, and that's really difficult to analyze, again, given that these things are always weighed together. If you look at any of these court cases, it's a very reasoned argument that always takes into account all four of those factors. So there really is no kind of golden number of a 60-minute video, 3 minutes is fine. The smaller you get, the more likely you are to be in a safe zone, but there's no magic percentage. Which brings us to my favorite copyright myths.
Eric, I was just going to interrupt you
yes,
for just a moment. We're at sort of like a halfway point right now. Does anybody have any pressing questions at the moment about our session? Because if not, we can absolutely move on. But I just wanted to give everybody a little check-in part, or check-in moment.
Okay. I'll hustle up a little bit, I guess.
Oh no, you're doing fine. Just wanted to make sure that everybody was still with us, and if they had any questions, they could ask.
Not seeing anything in the chat either.
Yeah, me neither, buddy. All right.
These are kind of simplified, these things, but they do touch on things that we've mentioned, but I also think on some very common ideas in the educational setting. So a lot of people, we were talking about actual registration with the Copyright Office or putting some sort of copyright notice on the item. It does, as we mentioned before, there doesn't need to be any registration. There doesn't need to be any statement of copyright. Just the fact that it's a creative work expressed in some tangible form, again, puts that under protection. So don't assume that because you don't see any copyright notice on the thing itself that you can freely distribute it. That is absolutely not the case. Another one is people often kind of go overboard thinking about fair use and really swinging it into an all or nothing, where if it's for education, then fair use allows it. As we covered in our brief little scenarios there, that there really is gray zones to be navigated. I'm hoping that the resources that we present in the last half of this presentation will make that gray area much easier for you to navigate. So, another myth, as I alluded to already, there's no magic percentage rule for fair use. The fact that it's could get at the heart of the work or potentially significantly affect the market in some analyses might weigh heavier than the amount of the work. So that, again, no magic percentage there. It really is all those factors rolled together in the balance. The TEACH Act means that I can line for distance education. Again, oversimplified for clarity, but again, you want to take all those things into account and really try to limit the potential for infringement in whatever way that you can. And most situations really do allow for what a reasonable person would do in that situation. There was actually Ryan used to teach at Georgia Tech, or used to be a librarian at Georgia Tech, and they actually went through, gosh, it's been almost a decade now of copyright litigation on their electronic reserve situation. Yeah, and that's still going on as far as I'm aware. It's been batted back and forth between the upper and lower courts, but significantly, I see him on typing something. But there were a number of counts that they were being sued for violating by publishers in their use of electronic reserves, and most of the courts found very often in maybe 5 of the 90 counts that they were looking at that they did take reasonable measures. So the very fact of you taking time to analyze and make that consideration and taking those reasonable measures really does count. That's what we're looking for in the resources that we're providing today. Definitely want to make you aware of a couple of resources that are easy for you to access. The USA Library, the University of St. Augustine Library, on their website, we do have a copyright information page with some materials that kind of help faculty analyze and think about fair use and copyright. I think the most valuable one, though, really is this roadmap that I've put up here, the Are You Being Copyright Compliant flyer. it's basically just a couple of decision points that really simplify how you approach sharing copyrighted works in your class. I'll kind of go through that step by step in a minute, but I want to make you for sure aware of that, because that I think is one of the most valuable and time-saving pieces in there. Ryan threw that link into the chat there too. So if you want to access the "Are you being copyright compliant?" that's on the faculty page that Ryan linked there. You can always contact me, Scholarly Communications Librarian. Again, I'm not a lawyer, but I do have some copyright law training. And Deborah Zimick would kind of be, if it's really something that we can't resolve, she is the general counsel for the University of St. Augustine. So when things get really hairy, we can always reach out to her for actual legal advice. But the copyright page, some of the resources on there that we're going to cover, and me, I think, are hopefully useful resources for you. Just to take a quick peek at the copyright compliant guide, it's just a number of decision points that really kind of get you clear as soon as possible. So one of the very first things, and the very first thing on there is your work covered, or is the work that you want to use covered by our annual copyright license? So that's what I'm going to talk about now. If it's covered under our annual copyright license, you're good to go. You don't need to even go to the second branch. You're done. So I'm going to talk about that real quick. So through the Copyright Clearance Center, the University of St. Augustine pays an annual fee to license a large number of works. So there's linking through the copyright page to get to search this information. But you can search for a given work, whether it's a textbook or a journal, and identify the work that you're looking at, and look at our license, and it'll tell you if digital sharing or photocopying is allowed. So that covers physical photocopies if you want to place something on reserve in the library, digital sharing, either as a PDF of a chapter or something like that, or posting in an e-learning platform like Blackboard. So if it's covered under that license, you're good to go. I do want to do a quick demo of that. Let me get into my browser window. So to get to that, we'll just go through the resource guides, which is the link that Ryan shared. There's a copyright guide. And of course, my internet is slow. Under the for employees or for faculty section, there's the copyright compliance guide that I mentioned. And here's the copyright license, annual copyright license that we maintain. The link that you can click on to search that. Once you're onto that website, you will need to have a login. I have mine in there already, but we could just search, say, the textbook of physical rehabilitation that I'm familiar with. So once I am not logged in. Okay. So once you log in here, you can see the rights that you're allowed. So it'll let you know if it's available for use in electronic reserves, whether or not you can post that on an institution intranet or make photocopies. And all you really need to do is search the title and maybe the author if you really need to narrow that down. So it's pretty easily usable. If you are intimidated by that, you can certainly contact me or one of the other librarians and we can assist you. But let me find a good one that you can see how it lays out the rights. There we go. So that very first Physical Rehabilitation, Assessment and Treatment, that's a book published by F.A. Davis. If you're in the PT program, I'm sure you're very familiar with it. If you're in another program, maybe not. If you're not able to see that, I can zoom in a little bit. But you can see under our license, it does allow for digital sharing. It does allow for copyright or for photocopy. If I want to get a little more detail, I can click on terms, and you can see examples include use in a course pack, course management system, emailing copies within the institution, displaying in a presentation within the institution. They do put 10% of the entire work. That's their terms. That's the license terms. Again, those numbers get bandied about as if it's a magic number that's okay. That's only the case here because that's written into our license. But you can see if it's covered under these licenses, we have some pretty expansive rights. So if I want to photocopy 2 chapters of that textbook and put them in my course shell, that's totally allowed and totally licensed because we pay these annual blanket license fees. Okay, so that's your number 1 stop. Number 2 on that list, if I go back to my thing, is maybe it's an open access resource, or maybe it's available within the library. If you can't post the item directly, you can always link out to something. So really the best practice for sharing copyrighted materials online is to link to it whenever possible. That way you're not the one that's actually distributing the work. You're just connecting the user to the place that is distributing it. PubMed Central, if you use PubMed, you may know that a lot of those resources on PubMed, the journal articles, are made available as free articles through PubMed Central. If you want to link out to a PubMed Central, that's totally legit. Open access or open educational resources, a lot of times people will put textbooks online that they have essentially released the rights to so that people can link to them and share them. If you want to do that, that's perfectly okay too. So rather than actually copying, posting the full item that it is that you want to share, linking out to it is a really useful way and very safe way to share that content. One of the primary things that you can do if you're sharing journal articles through the library website, a number of those sites, you may have created a, oops, everything went weird. You may have created a link to a journal article when you were browsing, and then you shared that with someone and they couldn't use it. There's a function called permalinks, which takes place within a lot of these resources. So on our EBSCO databases, we have a situation where you can actually create a permanent link that will link someone into the database, and they can access the article that way. If you're going to be sharing journal articles that are available through the library in your course shell, the best thing to do is create one of these permalinks. So I'm going to show you how to do that real quick. Again, let's do an occupational therapy article. So I'm just going to find random guidelines for documentation. I've got a PDF text here. Oops, things just jumped on me. So I want to access this PDF. You'll see that it was available through the CINAHL database. That was on the previous screen. So here's that text. This would be potentially an article or a chapter from an ebook. If you look within the interface, there's usually some sort of icon like we see over here that's a little chain link. Hover on that and it says permalink. If I click that, it's going to create this URL, this web address here. Now, if you look, you'll see that it's different from the one above. This is the one in my browser, but this permalink is the one that I would want to share. So I could hit Control-C or copy that and paste that into my course shell, and that will link the student directly to this article. Just want to make people aware of those so that you can maybe do a little better job of sharing links. Any questions on that? That can be a little daunting potentially, so I just want to open that up. Okay. To drop them in if you do. We've also got a few fair use evaluation tools within the library website that I think are incredibly useful. Monty says no questions. Okay. One of the most useful ones I've found is this thinking through fair use. So those conversations that we had on those previous scenarios, where we're really saying, well, it's educational use, but it does kind of infringe on the market. This thinking through fair use at the University of Minnesota is one of the best ones that I know of. We've got some other checklists and fair use information on the library copyright page. The link for that's there again. But I think for fair use evaluation, having some sort of checklist or some sort of way to go through and really visualize how those factors are interplaying is very useful. So I've got one more scenario for this, and if we'd like, we can go ahead and go through. We'll actually take this and go through the fair use, thinking through fair use tool. Still with me, Ryan?
I'll go ahead and read this one for you. So an instructor wants to use an article from a physical therapy journal to illustrate the validation of a motor assessment. The professor scans the journal article and posts it within the course shell for students to read.
Okay.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, while I pull up that tool, why don't you go ahead and start the conversation, Ryan?
All right. So something that I will post to you all is other than attempting that, how else might the instructor offer this information? If you can think of any particular way, contribute it now. If not, it could be something just to consider throughout the remainder of this presentation.
Okay, so we'll go through real quick.
Our checklist.
So this is the University of Minnesota's Thinking Through Fair Use tool. I do have links to this in our references at the end if you're panicking about where to find this.
I'm going to drop a couple over here in the chat too, Eric.
Yeah, go for it. It'd be great. And then, so you can see it kind of goes factor by factor and has you look at a couple of facts about your use and how that weighs in that balance. And then whether or not on that factor you come out strongly and strongly favoring or strongly against actual fair use. So let's just kind of give this some quick thought. You can always enter. This doesn't actually analyze anything for you, but it does allow you to kind of see how the different things play out. So in our situation where he's scanning the journal article and putting it in the course shell, definitely educational use, criticism or commentary. He's using it to illustrate what that validation looks like. So there is some potential commentary and instruction there. For our university, nonprofit, we're sort of in the commercial activity, so I would say that's a sort of half check as I would see that one. I think so far we're coming off in favor. Start thinking about the nature of the copyrighted work. It is a published source. That counts for us. Not really creative. It's very factual. So that I think weighs pretty heavily on our side. Amount and substantiality, we are using the entire article, but when you think that the journal is the publisher, we're really only using a portion of the journal, so that might be considered somewhat gray in there. We are only using as much as is necessary for our purpose, so I think that one comes out somewhat neutral potentially. And now we're looking at the effect on the market. So Ryan sort of talked about some potential other ways that we could do this. If this journal article is available as open access, we could link to it. We could link to it. If it's available as a library resource, we could create a permalink and have the students log into the library to do it. But when we're looking at the potential market, I really don't think any of those students are going to go out and subscribe to the journal at $8,000 or whatever that journal costs for a subscription. So I don't think it's substantially affecting that. We're not making many copies. We're only making one copy, either posting it in reserve or putting it in an e-reserve. So we're not making many. We may do this for one term, or we may do it every term. If it's repeated or long-term use, or you do that over and over, then that starts to weigh against. We're really not impacting the market exactly. If anything, by utilizing that journal, our library is subscribing to it, and I would say potentially even increasing the market by using and accessing that content on a regular basis. There's really, I'm not really seeing much on this side. So if it's a PDF and it's easy to redistribute that, so a student might get a hold of that PDF and place it online. In these sort of additional thoughts, I would just add that we might want to add some sort of language to the post if we're posting it directly, saying that it's copyrighted material and not to be distributed. But I think the effect on the market comes up somewhat in favor for us. I don't think we're impairing the market in any significant way by linking to that article or sharing that article in the course shell. So we kind of scan back over this, and we've got a somewhat favors, neutral, strongly favors, somewhat favors. So again, it's not a cut and dried answer, but you can see in this situation, when we look at all the details of the single situation, it seems to weigh fairly favorably under fair use here. So that's a really useful tool for thinking about those sorts of things when you're going to share that content. Let's go back to my slides. At a couple other points, how else might the instructor offer this? Linking out to an open access version if possible, linking to the library if possible. So that's, I think those tools are very useful to go back to on a regular basis in any situation like this, because again, weighing that all in a kind of holistic fashion, it can be really difficult to do without some sort of tool in your hand to allow for that. Getting close to wrapping up here, so I just want to go back to that roadmap again. This is available online. I think it's pretty clear how this progresses. The first one being, check that blanket copyright license right off the bat. If it's covered under there, your life is easy and there's nothing much else to say. Then start thinking about whether it's available as open access or not, and whether it's available through the library. And then those final bits kind of come down to whether it's required for the course or campus-based or distance-based, because obviously those have different considerations when the students are able to access things within the physical library. But I think particularly the first few decision points on there are really going to get you 90% of the way. And then you can always contact me or the other librarians if you have additional questions. That being said, I kind of want to open it up overall.
Yeah, do we have any questions right now?
I don't see anybody typing, and I don't see anybody piping in.
Yeah.
Before you go, consider questions open, but before you go, I do want to, I'm going to skip ahead to that real quick if I can, Ryan.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
And then I'll go back to your wrap-up.
Right.
Before anybody disappears, I just want to get a little bit of feedback from you guys. So we are consistently trying to improve the presentations, the webinars, and the information that the library gives. So we just have a couple of questions for your feedback on here. The first one is, was the information in this webinar useful? I hope it was, but if it's not, I'd like to know that as well so that we can tighten things up and make it relevant. I hope that there was something useful and new. If there was, just click yes in the yes/no choices on your screen. Are you seeing that, Ryan? Is that displayed to everybody? The polling box? So that's my first question, is was this useful? Maybe it's not being displayed. Oh, there's one. Okay, so it is in there. Okay. So was there information in here that was useful and new? If there was, I'd love to know what was most useful to you, and you can type that in the chat box, either privately to me or to the group. And if there wasn't, if there was something in here that you hoped we'd covered in the time that we've had, I'd like to add that in the next iteration of this. So if you can share that with me, I'd love to hear as well. That being said, I'll turn it back over to Ryan to wrap up.
That's been fantastic, Eric. Thank you so much. So whereas Eric is our distance learning librarian who specializes in scholarly communication, I'm the distance learning librarian who specializes in things such as instruction and learning, and that's precisely why we wanted to host this event tonight. Our goal, is when you really get down to it, is to make this process as easy as possible. But there are definitely just a few points just to keep in mind as you take off from the session tonight. Evaluating your classroom readings and learning resources is that if you're, say, in the process of maybe beginning to create a course, or if you're just trying to revamp, retool some of the current resources in your courses, whether it's an on-ground course or it's an online course, whatever happens, just feel free to contact the library at library@usa.edu, and we will, by all means, help you through this process. And we will direct you toward those tools, some of which Eric covered tonight, such as WriteFine, which, by the way, I mean, like with that tool, essentially, just as he said, that's definitely, should be one of your first stops in the roadmap, because if you're good there, you're good essentially anywhere. And of course, for those pesky resources perhaps that are not covered under our annual copyright license, and that are open access, by all means use link out, use links for your students, use your fair use valuation tools, as you go through your checklist. And again, by all means, make sure that if you have any questions, you can always contact us, myself, Eric, or just the library in general. But we really, really appreciate you coming out tonight, and we actually hope to be doing some more sessions that are sort of similar to this. So if you could, just give us some more of your feedback, and we really appreciate your time tonight. It's almost 10 o'clock, so we made it just in time, which is terrific. So anyway, thank you so much, and if you guys have any questions, we'll hang out for a few minutes and answer any. So thank you very much for coming out. We really appreciate it. And thank you very much, Eric. I definitely appreciate your work in this.
And again, this will be recorded and posted on the archived webinars on the website as soon as I get it edited. So if you want to go back and access it, particularly to see our contact information or review any of these references, it will be available there for you as well.
Yes, right. Yeah, that is correct. It's recorded, so if you want to view it again, it's going to be there for posterity. So anyway, thank you, everybody. We really appreciate it.
All right.
Bye, Ryan.
Oh, thank you.
See you later, Amani. It's good to meet you.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Thanks, Jennifer.
I'll count that as a yes, since she.
You're welcome. Thank you,
You're welcome. That's a yes.
Yes, please do count it as a yes. I think it's just the poll doesn't show up the same on my phone.
Oh yeah, because you're
that's
on your phone.
That's quite possible.
Right.
Thanks for voicing.
On my phone. I don't think the poll showed up the same.
Okay.
Yep,
well, thank you, Jennifer.
Is Is there anything that you
Yep.
would
Good
have liked to have heard? All right. Good night.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. What were you asking? Was there anything what?
Oh, I was just asking as far as what was particularly useful, or if there was anything that you would like to have had covered. I wanted to quiz you on that if I could,
Well,
get that
the
feedback.
right find, I was starting to send you a little email with that since I didn't answer the poll and everything, because I didn't know about the right find, so that was definitely new.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, I think we can make that a little more prominent.
I don't think I'd ever seen exactly how to navigate through to where our copyright agreement information was, right? Like where we can go look that up. So
sure, I'm going to create. Sorry, go ahead. Oh, I was just going to say I'm going to create.
I had put in on some of the
video on that.
Oh, great! Yeah, that'd be very helpful.
Yeah, we can do a follow-up, Eric, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Great. I was actually going to suggest also the permalinks. I knew how to do that, and I use those. And I actually encourage my students to use those in their posts,
in assignments,
posting discussions. It would be great to have just like a little 3-minute tutorial for students on how to do the permalinks.
Thank you for that.
I will make a note of that, and I will do that very quickly.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll absolutely do that.
And thank you. And thank you for telling your students to do that too. That's fantastic.
I try. I'm going through and trying to add permalinks for all the resources in my courses, and I'm hoping by modeling that, maybe it'll catch on.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah, the problem is
it's not
necessarily obvious. I think the problem is it's not necessarily obvious from the link that that's what's happening. So, but we can definitely get an educational video out there that you would then be happy to be perfectly able to share within any of your course modules too.
Exactly.
Great. Thanks for that feedback, Jen.
So you guys do it. That's awesome. Thank you.
Right.
Oh, absolutely. No, that's definitely our purview.
All right, great. Well, have a good evening. Thanks again.
All right. Take care. We'll see you.
Thanks for coming out.
Bye.